Fans me too. Are you still pissed off? All right. How about this? Dial it down a little bit. Yeah. All right. So you hate Trump. I get it. You absolutely hate him. So you're going to go on all of your friends who are Trump supporters' walls, and you're going to say, "Oh, you're all wrong. You're terrible to support this guy. Is the end of our democracy." But you'll never make a policy criticism. You'll simply attack the man. All right, so let's go through some of the top lies I'm seeing about Trump. Okay? Obviously, as anybody with an R next to their name in an election, he gets labeled a racist, and most specifically a white supremacist. Why? Because of video that was edited as a result of the Charlottesville protest over the Robert E. Lee statue, when he said there were fine people on both sides. There was obviously a melee broke out, a woman died, Heather Heyer. That video was edited. That video was edited in a way that made it sound like he was somehow aligned with white supremacy. But the full clip said, there were fine people on both sides, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. I disavow them completely, okay? But people cut that out, and they, much like they're sending their Mexican, or sending their rapists, right? They get edited and taken out of context and then spewed all over the internet and news. Okay? It's nonsense. You have to understand the notion of white supremacy is that somebody believes that the white race is superior to other races, other heritages, other ethnicities. Okay? If you were to make that case, you would have to show a history of Trump not having relationships with African Americans, not hiring African Americans or other ethnicities, but that's not the case. I mean, in the 90s, the guy got a Rosa Parks Award. He was heralded by many in the African American community as a great friend in the case of Don King and Herschel Walker. And in the case of Trump International, during the 2016 election, there was a woman who was an executive at Trump International, and she repeatedly said, I had an incredible career trajectory with Trump International, and she gave her testament to the righteousness of Donald Trump. So this idea, obviously, he had disavowals. He's repeatedly shown that he is, he has tons of diversity in his organizations. Is simply not true to be able to sit here and badger Trump supporters with the idea that Trump is a white supremacist. Also, look at the number of African Americans that he has in his cabinet, in his, on the campaign trail, when he goes and campaigns for Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, for Tim Scott, for African Americans across the nation, Kim Klacik. You simply cannot show me that Trump believes that the white race is superior. And this whole idea of taking the MAGA hat and saying, oh yeah, it's make America white again, it's nonsense. All right, that he's beholden to Russia, that somehow he's beholden to Russia. Obviously we'll talk about Russian collusion in a little bit, but the idea that he is pursuing policy that would be in favor of Putin and not in favor of the citizens of the United States, that doesn't hold water either. What is the main export of Russia? Energy, right? Oil, natural gas. For us to pursue a policy of energy independence, we became energy independent, as in we export more than we import. We're able to be self-sufficient in our energy production, both in terms of natural gas and oil. That's bad for Russia, right? I mean, we haven't felt it here in California, the lowering gas prices, because we have such a huge tax on our gas here. But across the nation, gas prices have gone down, and that's really bad for the top line revenue of Russia. So that doesn't hold water. What about Syria policy, right? In foreign policy, the idea that Bashar al-Assad was going to be backed in a proxy war between us and Russia there in Syria, and they had the chemical weaponry that was, shown all over the media as a means to draw us into that conflict on a humanitarian basis. Trump didn't fall for it. He said, no, we're not doing that. So proxy wars and energy independence, two simple ways to look at the fact that there's nothing that Trump has done policy-wise. And you can add to that NATO, right? The fact that he's built up NATO, he wants the other nations of NATO to pay their fair share. The total, income of the NATO organization has increased because Trump has put those requirements on these other nations. So you simply can't make the case, because NATO being strong is bad for Russia. They're going to be able to push off any Russian aggression in Ukraine, Crimea, what have you. It's not holding. That he colluded with Russia to win the election. I really enjoyed seeing on C-SPAN, I think it was Sundar Pichai at Google, doing the big reveal of how much money was spent on Google AdWords during the 2016 election, and it was to the tune of $86,000 or something like this. I mean, under $100,000. And I was like, that's just laughable. Really? We have Russian hackers that are out there trying to influence our election by spending money to promote memes and whatnot that are going to promote Donald Trump. I'm not seeing it. I think that's a really dangerous thing to assume. The idea that we had GRU, that the Russian hackers were responsible for the WikiLeaks hacks, that has not been confirmed. We went through the whole Guccifer thing. It's highly possible and probable that the Podesta and Clinton emails were given to WikiLeaks on a thumb drive. And what are we getting all bent out of shape for the truth coming out? It's like the idea of the method by which that actually made it into the hands of WikiLeaks and ostensibly influenced the election. It's really tenuous to suggest that it's happening via Russia. Now, they tried to make optics for this case, right? When they expelled all the Russian ambassador or the Russian nationals that were here in the Baltimore area, had to go back to Russia to make it look like, oh, we have a major Russian infiltration problem here. I'm just not seeing that in any way. I mean, Russia didn't change my vote. They didn't change your vote. Did they hack into the voting machines? I mean, if there was evidence that some IP address had somehow SSH tunneled into a voting machine, I don't think a lot of these voting machines are actually online. Maybe we'd have a conversation to say, okay, well, Russian hacked our election. But otherwise, it's just talking points. Doesn't make any sense. That he's responsible for the violence in our cities. Okay, Trump believes in federalism, right? The idea that states have their own sovereignty and there are things that they provide the protection for. And if they actually need the National Guard to be mobilized and brought in to quell violence, they can do that. He lets the mayors and the governors make their own decisions, whether it's COVID crisis or violence in the cities, and he's let them do that. And Ted Wheeler in Portland has let his city burn, and the mayor of Seattle let Chaz or Chop get completely out of control. Minneapolis burning down, you name it. These jurisdictions are all democratically run and have full opportunity to mobilize their police force to quell violence. But they're not, because they want this burning symbol of the country burning on Trump's watch. And it's simply not true. You cannot make Trump culpable for the sins of these Democratic mayors and governors. That he had a poor response to COVID-19. Okay, we all watch the coronavirus task force every day, right? From March 15th through the end of April, for sure. We watched Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, whether it was mobilization to build ventilators, which turned out to not be needed because that wasn't the mechanism by which the virus attacked. He didn't even need to invoke the Defense Production Act, in which you can compel a private company to build something in the service of the government. He did not need to do that. He found everybody from CVS and LabCorp testing resources to Walgreens to All these companies that came on board and said, we're going to figure this stuff out. We had, I wouldn't say we had a sense of unity, but there was a period of time there where Fauci and Cuomo and Newsom and these guys were actually saying that things that Trump were doing on a federal level were helping them locally before we devolved back into politics as usual. Okay, so you cannot make the case that Trump made poor choices. If anything, the key choice he made was to stop travel coming in from China, and that would prove to be, even Fauci admitted this, that would prove to be one of the most critical decisions, even though he was criticized as being xenophobic during the time it happened, one of the greatest reductions or mitigations in the loss of life and infection spread in this country. Meanwhile, as you well know, Italy had huge numbers, not just because they had an aging population that was more susceptible to the virus, but between Wuhan in China and Milan in Italy, there's an awful lot of traffic going back and forth because of the synergies between the fashion industry in Milan and the manufacturing in Wuhan province. And you had a lot of death there and illness as a result of that. So you can clearly make the case that there could have been a lot more loss of life if he hadn't done that one big stopgap measure right out of the gates. Okay, that he profits from his properties by being in office, that somehow he's profiting. As you know, he bought that post office near, right there in DC, great location. The idea that people and other dignitaries come and stay there and spend money there, I mean, I know we have this emoluments clause, but you can't ask somebody to freeze their real estate empire when they come and become the president of the United States. It doesn't make any sense. These are people that likely would still be staying at that property even were he not to be president. It's a very, very tenuous case to attempt to show some level of corruption. That he increased the fees at Mar-a-Lago, somehow, people spending 2x on joining his country club means that he's selling access to himself as the presidency. It's a matter of supply and demand, right? More people want to join Mar-a-Lago, he can increase the initiation price. That he makes America unliked in the world community. Is that really the case? Do you really think that all these other nations are looking at us and yearning for the Obama days? Look, in these governments that are keen on a one world socialism, the growth of the EU or the mandate of the UN to oversee all activities in every nation, yeah, maybe they can see some amount of change of course, change of direction on account of Trump's new policies and wanting to just he wants to make country-to-country agreements. I don't want to make overarching agreements. I want to go one by one. Let's make agreements with what our plans are for trade, what our plans are for common defense. I don't see internationally, and I haven't, in my travels internationally, I have not heard people make a case that Trump is seen differently and in terms of America on the world stage, our reputation. I'm not seeing it. That he's lied 20,000 times. Okay, I've yet to hear, I see this number, he's lied over 20,000 times. I say, well, what's one of the lies? Well, he inflated the numbers on his inauguration. Okay, tell me a substantive lie that Trump has told that really has an impact in terms of, George Bush saying no new taxes, and then there's a new tax, or Obama saying you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, and then Obamacare taking that away. Simply not the case. You show me a substantive lie related to policy that Trump has said. I've yet to hear a liberal that can actually do that. That the impeachment that he went through is proof of his incompetence. Listen, that impeachment was politically motivated. Now that we have the Hunter Biden laptop, it's further proof, because in fact it was Christopher Wray, who got that laptop right around the same time that this whole impeachment was started, on the basis of a conversation between Trump and the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, over looking into what was going on between Hunter and Joe and Burisma. The Ukrainian people, we went into this episode yesterday, Ukrainian people are very upset that they've paid over $1.5 billion more for natural gas over the years on account of our little scheme to reroute the natural gas that was coming to them. In the interest of their independence from Russia, we basically had them pay a lot more, and we told them not to produce more natural gas, and we had our politicians, Biden and Kerry and their sons, profiting from that scheme. And as that comes out more, people will be enraged. The Ukrainians are already enraged. It's the U.S. folks that still have yet to really find out about it. So the impeachment was politically motivated, and now we're seeing that he was vindicated to basically make that suggestion to look into it. That all of the turnover in his administration is proof of his incompetency. I'm seeing this all the time. Oh, well, look how many press secretaries he's had. Look how many chiefs of staff he's had. There's a couple things. One, these are grueling jobs, and as people are not interested in continuing to do the job, he finds somebody new. Also, there are a lot of people who are wolves in sheep's clothing who are encouraged to get involved in the administration and then ultimately become a thorn in the side or find ways in which they can lead Trump into some strange temptation that can boomerang back on him and put him into hot water. And there's a lot of cases where he's simply realized that so-and-so doesn't have the best interests of his administration at heart, and so he fires them and moves on to somebody else who can actually do the job and is aligned with Trump's interests. That's not an argument for proof of his incompetency. That his immigration policy is racist. Okay, look, we take in 1.8 million legal refugees or legal immigrants every year. He would like to make that into a meritocracy. He wants to stop chain migration, where one person comes here legally and then gets their entire extended family here. He doesn't think that's necessarily good for America, and I would agree with him there. On the immigration policy with respect to our border, this idea that we're saying that Trump is separating children and families at the border and putting them in cages. I mean, first of all these pictures of cages that are shown are actually pictures that were taken during the Obama administration. And there was a reason why they separated families and children. And that reason is that there's enough sex trafficking that's happening across the border where a minor who's not actually with their parent, but they're with a trafficker, is coming across the border. And in order to ascertain that, in fact, that parent is really the parent of that child, they need to separate them for questioning, and they do that. It was based on a Flores decision, and it's a policy that goes back before the Trump administration. What he did change was this notion of asylum, where, or catch and release, right? Where if you make it onto American soil and you're apprehended because you're an illegal border crossing or what have you, that we just release you into the United States and you go, find a domicile, find a job, and then you don't ever come back for your court date. I think that was an important thing for him to do, because we kind of had an immigration policy in name only. It was like the number of people who actually would show up for that court date was so low, and so we were basically just letting people flood into the country. He was smart to do that. That his trade policies don't work. Okay. Look, NAFTA, you remember the giant sucking sound in the 90s? We needed to change for the American manufacturing company and the American worker. We needed to change the way that our trade is being done with both Canada and Mexico. And he replaced NAFTA with USMCA, which is much more equitable for the American people. And I don't think anybody can fault him for it. His trade policy with respect to China, he said, look, we have a massive trade deficit. You know, we're buying far more from China than they're buying from us. In order to save our economies that are competing with China on these things, we need to increase tariffs on China. Strangely, that happened right before, that happened in January of 2020, that the next phase of that agreement was put into place, and strangely, COVID appeared right after that. So I think his trade policies do work, and I think we're only starting to see the long-term efficacy of those, because as imported goods become more expensive from overseas, we will have more of an incentive for us to domestically supply those things here. And that Republican detractors prove that he's a threat to the nation. Well, like I said, very similar to the turnover. I think that what was so unique about Trump was that he took a completely different tack on immigration and trade. And we already talked about those, but so many Republicans, neocons and neolibs, were aligned on the idea of this military-industrial complex that was financing and supplying as defense vendors for all these foreign wars. And it was a means of a lot of people lining their pockets. And I think both sides were pursuing not a very noble goal in doing that. And so we saw with Trump a new set of policies. And so you're going to see a lot of Republicans that, you know, maybe they weren't the real Republicans. Maybe the neocons were also globalists, and Trump has a notion of not isolationism, but American sovereignty and looking out for the citizens of our nation, especially the middle class. So I don't think that, you know, a general who says they're voting for Biden is something that's going to allow you to make the case that Trump is this crazy threat to an American, American democracy as we know it. I think what our big threats are these huge censorships. I think what our big threats are these sanctuary cities. We have a number of threats, but Trump is not one of them. I hope you'll piece at least some of these together. If there's anything I missed, I would love to answer it specifically, but I'm looking at all the chatter. I'm looking at the ways in which people will come onto a Trump supporters wall and try to, you know, point them to something that's superbly wrong with Trump. And I tried to amalgamate a bunch of them into this idea so that we can kill it in one fell swoop. Thanks for following America's New Clothes, and hope to have more for you very soon.